Good morning. It is such again an honor to be able to be here with you all today and looking forward to the rest of the week where we'll be able to sit and to be together and worship together and I'll try not to be boring. I'll try to, as always, teach and preach in truth, which is the most important thing. So that God's word can be spread. Just a little bit of information. I like to at least introduce myself for those who may not know me. And I look back through my notes on my computer, and I believe the last gospel meeting that I did was in 2015 here. And then I did the Vacation Bible School in 2016 here. And so it's been 2016 since I've been here, and 2015 since I've been in a meeting, and so I'm thankful for the opportunity. I'm no better than I was back then, so if you thought I might have gotten better, you're wrong. Our family has grown quite a bit since then. Of course, Alana, my wife, and then our oldest son, Braden, and then we have our oldest daughter, Peyton, and our youngest daughter, Paige. Of course, they are all still with us. And now we have 3 foster children to go along with those 3. So there's 6 total, which is one of the reasons why Alana couldn't come today. I hope that they can at least all come once throughout this week, but with everything going on when you have 6 kids, with everything going on and with the foster children having parent visits and all of those good things, it's just hard to tell what's going to happen. I'll be here every night, but hopefully they can all come at least one night, and you can get to meet them. We have, I think it was in May, at the very beginning of May, we brought in Adam and Christopher, and so we're thankful to have them. And then about a month later, in June, we picked up Chloe, and so she's 8. Adam is about 17 months now, and Christopher is about 4 months. So our hands are full, but so's our quiver, and it's been good to have all of them, and we're blessed. I ask that not only you pray for my children and pray for the foster children that we have, but pray for the foster children's parents as well, that they get doing what they need to do and get back on the right track as well. And so I'll not bore you with any more family information, but I just wanted you to know a little bit about who we are and why my family's not here with me today. Chloe has a parent visit today, and so she had to stay at home, so Alana had to stay at home with her, but hopefully sometime this week they'll get there. We're going to talk this morning about what a dead girl saw in her father. I know that seems rather harsh, maybe when you read the title and say, well, you know, that's kind of, you know, why are we talking about a dead girl? Well, the girl didn't stay dead for very long, which is a blessing that Jesus has raised this young lady from the dead. And I want to go to Mark chapter 5 with you and gain a little bit of context as to what we're talking about this morning. So in Mark chapter 5, we're going to start in verse 21. We'll read through verse 24. There's a little pause in there in Scripture where the woman with an issue of blood kind of makes her appearance and touches the hem of Jesus' garment. We're gonna skip that part and just look at the before and after what happens with Jairus' daughter and Jairus. Starting in verse 21 of Mark 5, and when Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered about him, and he stayed by the seashore. And one of the synagogue officials named Jairus came up, and upon seeing him fell at his feet and entreated him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her, that she might get well and live." And he went off with him, and the great multitude was following him and pressing on. Now, if you skip that little part in there with the woman of issue of blood, we'll drop down into verse 35. While he was still speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue officials, saying, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher anymore?" But Jesus, overhearing what has been spoken, said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid any longer, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John and the brother of James. And they came to the house of the synagogue official, and he beheld a commotion and people loudly weeping and wailing. And entering in, he said, "Why make a commotion and weep? The child has not died, but is asleep." They began laughing at him. But putting them all out, he took the child's father and mother and his own companions and entered the room where the child was. Taking the child by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum," which translated means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl rose and began to walk. She was 12 years old, and immediately they were completely astounded. And he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this. And he said that something should be given to her to eat. We're going to talk not necessarily about this wonderful miracle that has taken place where Jesus raises this little girl from the dead, but I want to focus more on the father in this particular story. If you look, and again, I'll try not to use story too often, but this is a historical account of something that really happened. And I want to focus on this man and what he did and what his little girl saw in him that day. You know, fathers are very important to families. And if you look at a little bit of history of Father's Day, it was observed first on June 19th of 1910. It was something that was very unofficial that happened, but it was something that was celebrated in Spokane, Washington, June 19th of 1910. But it wasn't made official until 1966. Lyndon Johnson made Father's Day official. Mother's Day had gone on for a while, and we fathers apparently banded together and said, we need our own day as well. And so in 1966, that day happened. And I think as with a lot of these holidays that we have and what you might call Hallmark holidays, where these holidays that people make up so they can make money on certain things, selling cards or flowers or whatever the case may be, ties in the case of Father's Day, they make up these holidays so that they can make some money, and it loses its effectiveness to the point that the woman that drove so hard for Mother's Day so that she could celebrate her own mother, a few years later fought back against having it as a holiday for that very fact. She said they've taken something that was supposed to be so special that we look at, celebrating our mothers, and we've turned it into this money-making scheme. And so she pushed so hard for it to be a day, but it got kind of out of control, and it became just a place and a time to spend money and waste money. And it became less about the actual mothers and celebrating them as it did just making money and buying gifts. And so she fought against it. And a lot of things happen in that way. And so I want to talk about this father who was real. Right? A lot of fathers get gifts on Father's Day who aren't very good fathers. If you look at the family dynamic, some, at least from the U.S. Department of Education's standpoint, more than 70% of all juveniles in state reform institutions are from fatherless homes. So there is certainly a connection there between those who get in trouble and spend time in juvenile facilities and those who don't have fathers in their home. Sadly, a lot of these fathers are missing. But how often, dads, if you're a dad today, how often are we missing even when we're in the home? How often do we become that person that lives with mom in our homes? The father is still in the home, but he's still missing because he's taken all of his God-given responsibilities and passed them over to mom. How often do we do that? It's not just about them missing physically, because some of them are physically still there, but they've come up missing anyway. Sometimes as fathers, we have taken our God-given responsibility of being the spiritual leader in the home and passed that on to mom. And mom will take it. Not many times because she wants to, but because she has to. When I look at my own life, I love my dad to death. I truly do. And he is a wonderful father in many ways, but spiritually, he was missing. So Mom picked up that mantle, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. She knew somebody needed to do it. And it couldn't be him. It wasn't going to be him. And so she did that. And I think oftentimes, even when we are home, we pass that on to Mom. It's not the way that it should be. And I want to take a look at some of the things that this father did to make sure that that wasn't him in his home. When we are missing as fathers, it changes God's plan. God has a plan, and we change it when we come up missing. In Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 1, he says, "Hear, O sons of Israel, the instruction of a father, and give attention that you may gain understanding." Do we catch that? You know, a lot of times when we talk about children and we say, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Right? And we want to point at our children and say that. "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this." Well, you need to listen to what I say. But isn't God giving some instructions to parents when he says that? "Children, obey your parents." He's saying, parents, give your children some instruction. Give your kids some instruction. Do some teaching so that they can listen to you. And I think he's saying it here, "Hear, O sons of Israel, the instruction of a father." Father, give instructions to your children. In Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." That means, father, instruct your children. Mother, teach your children. It's not just about hearing and doing what I say, but it's about giving some instruction. And I think that when this little girl wakes up from her sleep, as Jesus says, she's not dead, she's sleeping. Well, everybody knew that she was dead. That's why they said, don't bother the teacher anymore. She's gone. And Jesus is about to raise her from the dead, but I think when she raises from the dead, she finds out a lot about her dad. And those are the things that I want to talk to you about this morning. The first thing that I think that this little girl sees in her father when she wakes up from the dead is that her father was not ashamed to seek Jesus. Notice what the Bible calls him. It says that he was a ruler of the synagogue, and not all rulers of synagogues were very faithful. Look at Luke chapter 13. Luke chapter 13 and verse 12. It says, "And when Jesus saw her, he called her over and said to her, 'Woman, you are freed from your sickness.' And he laid his hands upon her. Immediately she was made erect again and began glorifying God. And the synagogue official, indignant because Jesus healed on the Sabbath, began saying to the multitude in response, 'There are 6 days in which work should be done. Therefore come during them and get healed, but not on the Sabbath day.'" Do you think that this particular synagogue official missed the point? Here there's this notable miracle that's taken place, and yet, what's the focus? Well, you did it on the Sabbath day. You can't do that on the Sabbath day. You've got 6 other days to come and to heal these people. Come and do it then. Come and seek healing then. Do you think that Jairus would have cared if his daughter died on Saturday, on the Sabbath? I don't believe that he would have. I think he would have said, "I don't care that it's the Sabbath. If you can heal her, please do everything that you can to heal her. It doesn't matter if it's the Sabbath." So not all synagogue officials were not ashamed. Some of them were very ashamed to seek Jesus in their own lives, to have Jesus into their homes. We see that this little girl understands that her father was not ashamed to see. Here she wakes up and Jesus is in front of her, has just healed her. And so she can look at her father and say, he was not ashamed to bring Jesus here. He was not ashamed to go look for Jesus. Now I want you to notice something else about this, is that Jairus sought Jesus himself. He didn't wait for somebody else. He didn't send his wife after Jesus. He didn't say, "You know what, honey, maybe you should go." and talk to Jesus about. Maybe he'll be more sympathetic to you as a mother. So you go and get Jesus. You seek him out. You go find him. Do you think this was a difficult decision for Jairus to make? I believe it would have had to have been. There are times when our children are sick that all we want to do is just cuddle them, right? We just want to hold them and snuggle them because they're sick, and we don't want them to be sick. And if we could take that sickness away from them, we would in a heartbeat. But here, this man left because he knew somebody else could help more than he could. He didn't send his wife to do this. He didn't send one of his servants. He's the leader or a leader in the synagogue. He's got servants. He didn't say, servant, go find this man named Jesus and bring him back here. Do our kids, do other people see us seeking Jesus? How many times have we seen, and maybe it doesn't happen quite as often now as maybe it has in the past, where somebody will bring their children to Bible study or Bible school, or a lot of times it'll be like vacation Bible school. This used to happen all the time at Barnesville. There would be parents who would come, drop their children off, and then go have a date, go out to eat, and send their kids to vacation Bible school. So they're sending them, they're learning something about Jesus, but what does the child see? Why aren't you? I want to go get ice cream at Dairy Queen too. Why can't I go with you? Why do I have to be in here? And that's what we're teaching our children when we do that. We are not seeking, we want you to seek Jesus, but we're not going to do that. It's very inconvenient for us. This man doesn't do that. He says, I'm not ashamed to have my child know that I went and sought out Jesus. And as far as we understand, she was still alive when he left. She was still living when he went. So she saw him leave to go seek after this man that could heal her. I want us to understand that there is no reason that we should be ashamed to seek Jesus. But yet that's what the world will do. The world will try to shame us in seeking out Jesus because of some of the things that Jesus teaches. And as we talked about this morning, doesn't Jesus draw a line? And he says, there are going to be some people on this side of the line and some people on this side of the line, and sometimes those people are in the same family. It's going to separate sons and daughters and husbands and wives and fathers and sons and daughters. It's going to separate all of those people. So you're going to separate, have separation from friends and family members. But we don't need to be ashamed to seek after Jesus. Think about Paul in Romans, in the first chapter of Romans, in verse 16, what he says about that. He says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel. Why? For it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, even though it cost him almost everything that he had. Right? He was doing very well as a Pharisee. And that gospel cost him everything that he had, but he says, I'm not ashamed of it. It's the power of God that leads us to salvation. Peter in 1 Peter chapter 4, in verse 16, but if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not feel ashamed. But in that name, let him glorify God. We don't need to be ashamed. There's no reason to be ashamed to seek after Jesus. People will try to shame us. There's no reason to be ashamed of it. People want to tell you, you ought to be ashamed of yourself, trying to tell a woman what to do with her own body. If she wants to have an abortion, that's her choice. Isn't that what the world tells us? You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Do we need to be ashamed to seek after Jesus and his word? No. I'm not telling you what to do with your body, but I will tell you something, that Jesus sees that child as something very precious, because the breath of life is breathed into that child's nostrils by God. The very breath that they have. And that makes that child special. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what God wants you to do. I'm telling you the way God sees that child. It is precious in the sight of God. And I don't need to be ashamed to tell you that. Yes, you may try to shame me for that. You may try to say shame on you for thinking that way or for saying that. But I don't need to be ashamed, even if you are trying to shame me. It doesn't matter. This little girl sees in her father that he was not ashamed of Jesus. And look at the return that happens when we're not ashamed. If you look at Hebrews chapter 11 in verse 16, but as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Speaking of all of these heroes of faith, therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. God says, if you are not ashamed of me, if you are not ashamed of my son, guess what? I'm not ashamed to be called your God. Wow. What a blessing. What a precious thing that we have there. That not only are we not ashamed of Jesus, God's son, but God himself says, I'm not ashamed, Tony, to be called your God. You can call me your God anytime that you want. What a beautiful thing that we have. I can remember when I was growing up, and again, I love my dad to death. He just wasn't very much of a talker, but he was always there. I always knew how he felt. He didn't have to say anything. I still know to this day how he feels. If I called him right now and said, hey, I need your help, my car's broke down, he would be in the parking lot when I got done today to help. He may not say a lot to me or anyone else, but he would be there. I remember when I was playing in baseball, playing t-ball, first home run that I ever hit, my dad had been called to the stands to umpire second base. And as I ran, I hit a home run, and as I ran past first base on the way to second, my dad was there coaching. And all he did was this. And he stuck out his hand and slapped me 5 on the way by. Oh, as a 5-year-old kid, that lit up my world, right? Because Dad wasn't ashamed of me at that point. If I, hit it back to the pitcher's mound and got thrown out at first base, he might have been, right? Dad wasn't ashamed of me at that moment. He said, that's my boy, right? Slapped me 5. He didn't have to say anything. I understood that. I get that. I have a son now of my own, and that's, the way that you feel. You go out there and play hard. I'm not ashamed to be called your father. I don't care what somebody else says. Boy, they need to get that loser out of there. No, I'm proud of myself. I'm not ashamed that that's my son. Even if he is awful. He's not, but even if he is awful, I'm not ashamed of him. He's out there trying. He's out there giving it his all. And so I'm not going to be ashamed of him. Even if I'm the one screaming, get him out. We need to win this game. I'm not ashamed to be called his dad. God himself says, listen, I'm not ashamed to be called your God. You're my son. That should mean something to us. We shouldn't be ashamed to seek Jesus. And God says, if you aren't, I'm not going to be ashamed to call you, no matter what you do, no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, how much trouble that you've gotten into. If you seek after my son, I will forgive you, and I will not be ashamed to be called your God. What a blessing we have in that. When this little girl wakes up from being dead, she's going to also see that her father was not ashamed to bring Jesus into their home. Not only was he not ashamed to go out and seek Jesus, but he was not ashamed to bring Jesus into their home, as some people may have been. Well, think about this. How many people do we know of? And I've known of many people over my lifetime, and some of those people have really caused their children to stumble in the Lord because they were somebody different on Sunday as they were Monday through Saturday when they were at home. So they may go out and seek Jesus while they're here, but they never brought Jesus into the home. And that very much confused their children. And it is difficult now when they become older to say, listen, not everybody's like that. Not everybody's like that. There are some people who are the same, whether they're here or whether they're at home. And that's the way that we need to be. So not only was he not ashamed to go out and seek Jesus on behalf of his daughter, he was not ashamed to bring Jesus into his home. Now, think about the Jewish leaders of the day and how ashamed they may have been to bring Jesus into their home. Look at Luke chapter 15. Luke 15 in the first 2 verses. Now all the tax gatherers and the sinners were coming near to listen to him. And both the Pharisees and the scribes began to grumble, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them," something that they would never have done. They were pretty particular about who they brought into their home. Well, I'm not going to bring this person into my home. That person's a sinner. Do you know what that person does? Do you know who that person is? I've always said of my parents, both of them, they were very open and inviting. I may not have been allowed to go to certain places, right? If I would say, "Hey, can I spend the night at such and such a person's house?" they may have said, "Absolutely not. No way." But if I would have turned around and said, "Would you mind if I invited that person here?" No, not at all. Bring them. Anybody that you want to come into our home, bring them. The door is open. Open door policy, honestly. Even on school nights, many times, people stayed at my house. I may not have been allowed to go to their house, but they were welcome into our home at any time. Why? Because especially my mom had control over the situation. How particular are we in bringing people into our home? We're bringing Jesus. Look just a little bit further in Luke chapter 7. Back up a couple of chapters. Luke chapter 7 and verse 37. It says, "And behold, there was a woman in the city who was a sinner. And when she learned that he was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster vial of perfume." Again, there was a woman in the city who was a sinner. She didn't care that she was going to go into this Pharisee's house, but yet the reaction of this Pharisee kind of tells the story, doesn't it? What are you doing? What are you allowing her to do? I'm not going to let this sinner into my home. They were particular about that. But yet Jairus saw the benefits of having Jesus in his own home. And he was not going to deny his daughter. He was not going to deny the rest of his family the benefits of having Jesus into his home. Look at Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4. We talked about it a little bit ago. In Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, it says, "And fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." If you are going to do that, you're going to have to invite Jesus into your home. Because you can't just teach your children here and then expect them to know it. Because I believe that there's been this separation in our society that, yes, you can come to church on Sunday, but when you go to work on Monday, all that changes. All that's different. That's church and this is work. No, you need to be a Christian whether you're here or whether you're there. It doesn't matter where we are. We need to be a Christian all the time. And listen, one of the difficult things to do, honestly, is, and I played sports all through high school. I played basketball in college. And one of the very difficult things to do is to separate or to not separate that. To say, you know what, I've got a competitive spirit and I want to win, but I still have to be a Christian even when I'm out there competing. And there are many times where you see that lost. We can't do that. It's hard sometimes. It's difficult sometimes. And there are times where I believe that the decision needs to be made. You know what? You're not making the right decisions on the court or on the field. We need to remove that, right? We need to take that away from you because you have to be the best person, the best Christian you can be, whether you're out there or at home. You can be competitive, but yet still be a Christian and still act like a Christian. And that can be difficult. We cannot separate those. Christianity, our Christianity should be our life. In the 127th Psalm, in verse 1, Solomon writes, "Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchmen keep watch or keep awake in vain." It's useless. Unless God builds the house, it's going to fall. God built the church, it'll stand forever. Not this church building, we built that. God built the church, and that church will stand forever. Unless God builds it, it's going to be destroyed. It's going to fall down. Unless he guards the city, it doesn't matter how many precautions you take, how many walls you build, it doesn't matter. Unless God is watching it and protecting it, it will fall eventually. And we need to keep those things in mind. We cannot be ashamed to let Christ into our home, but the biggest thing is we cannot be ashamed to bring Christ into our home to rule that home. And I think, again, that's sometimes where we want to put the marker, right? I'll bring Christ into the home, but I'm still in control. No, if you bring Christ into your home, he's in control. Notice what happens when he invites Jesus into his home. Jesus takes over, doesn't he? In Mark 5 and verse 37, "And he allowed no one to follow with him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James." When he walks into this home, Jesus is now in control. And he says, "Yes, Mom and Dad, you are allowed to come back and see your daughter with me." Do you realize that? Jesus is now in control of this home. And Jairus doesn't care. He's not ashamed to bring him in. He's not ashamed to let Jesus rule that house. So the question for us this morning is, where is Jesus in your home? Is he allowed in, but he stays locked in the closet until we need him? Or is he free to roam wherever he wants because he rules the house? Because that's the way it should be. Yes, we want him in our home. Yes, we invite him into our home. But when we invite him into our home, it's under the understanding that Jesus is now in control of that home. There are many times where my children can call me out on certain things. Come on, Dad. That's not what Jesus would want us to do. That's not what Jesus would want us to say. And guess what? I'm in control of this house. I get to decide. I had a conversation with them one day because I had given them an answer to something already, and they went to my wife, who didn't know that I had already given an answer, and they were doing the thing that I told them they couldn't do, and I said, "Hey, hold on. I told you couldn't do that." "Yeah, but Mom said we could." And I said, "Who is the leader of this house?" And guess what my kids said? "Jesus." You're right. You are absolutely 100% right. But who's after Jesus? They're like, "Then that's you." Okay, then stop. Right? Don't do that anymore. They can call me out on that because they have an understanding. I have said that's who's in control of our home. So we make our decisions according to that. The final thing I want us to look at this morning is that this girl saw from her father that he was not ashamed to express love. Love is what compelled Jairus to leave his sick daughter and find Jesus. How often would we do that? Yes, it would have made for a tough decision, right? Fathers have to make tough decisions, or at least are supposed to make those difficult, tough decisions at times. Obviously, with the input and instruction of wives. And there are many things that I have said, you know what? You don't need to come and ask me about that. You take care of that. That's something that you're good at and you're better at, and so you can make those decisions without even asking me. It's okay. And there are very few things that I do without asking her. But most of those tough decisions, those difficult ones, she wants me to make those decisions. And I want to make them. And sometimes they are very difficult. But Jairus wanted her daughter to live, and he understood that the only way to do that was to seek out Jesus. Even though it may provide him with some ridicule in the circles that he was in, he was willing to do that. In John chapter 14 and verse 6, it says, Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And I think Jairus understands that. That when Jesus says, he doesn't say, I know the way, I can show you the way. He says, I am the way. You have to go through me. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. If I want you alive now, you'll be alive now. Because I am the life. And so he is still the only way. Not just in the sense of the account that we're looking at in Jairus and his daughter, but still today, he is the only way. And we find that this man leads Jesus to his daughter. Are we willing to do that? Because sometimes it's difficult to lead people to Jesus. And so what we need to do is lead Jesus to those people. Take Jesus to them. Because sometimes it's very difficult to get them to Jesus, right? Because read this book and it should cover everything, right? How many people are going to read that? Come into this building and you'll hear everything that you need to hear. How difficult is it to do that sometimes? No, we need to take Jesus to them. And they'll say, why do you act the way that you do? Why do you say the things that you do? Why are you different than either what you used to be, or why are you different than everybody else? Let me tell you about that. You've just led Jesus to them. And he will knock at their heart, and they get to decide whether they open or not. But you have taught the gospel as we looked at this morning. Look at John, in the first chapter of John, starting in verse 40. It says, one of the two who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. Now notice what he does in verse 41. And he found first his own brother Simon and said to him, we have found the Messiah, which translated means Christ. Now pause for just a moment. How much do we know about Andrew in Scripture? This is kind of it. There's really not much spoken about Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. So imagine if he hadn't done this. Imagine if Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, did not go to his brother and say, found the Messiah. We have found the Messiah. He brought Jesus to his brother. Imagine if he hadn't. Where would we be without the instructions of Peter? And even the bad example of Peter sometimes. All of the people that Peter led to Jesus. Think about that. You know, there was a time in my life when I was kind of embarrassed. I can remember, during two-a-days, we would typically have literally two-a-days. I think sometimes they kind of start early in the morning and just go one long session. We used to do it in the morning before the heat of the day, and then in the evening after the day. So we'd have to come to the school twice to do our two-a-days. And so that means on Wednesday night, if we're going to avoid the heat of the day, it might be on Wednesday evening services. And I can remember how embarrassing it was to me to go in and say, Mom won't let me come. And then all of a sudden, I don't know what it was or when it was exactly. I don't know that it put my finger on it, but I started to make Jesus my own. And I started to want to tell them, you know what? Yeah, I've got services tonight. I'm not going to miss Bible study for practice. Sorry. If you have it at a different time, I'll be there. I'll do everything that I can, but I'm not going to miss it. And I felt kind of proud of myself until I read this and realized what I had missed all of those years. I never once said, would you like to come with me? I missed all of those opportunities. Yes, at some point I was able to say, hey, I'm missing practice and I don't care who knows it because I'm going to Bible study. But how many opportunities did I miss to say, why don't you come with me, friend? Now, there are a few friends that I have that are now Christians from back then, even from back in high school, that later in life I was able to have opportunities to talk to them about it. But there are so many of those other opportunities that I get two of my high school teammates that are gone, that are dead. And I'll never get that chance again. So we have to take advantage of those opportunities when we have them. Because imagine if Andrew had not gone and gotten his brother and led him to Christ. God has so many plans for us. And one of those plans is for the Father to do all of the things that we talk about this morning. To not be ashamed to seek out Jesus. To not be ashamed to bring Jesus into your home. And to not be ashamed to express your love to your children. How are we doing with those things? You know, a lot of times the world will tell us different ways to express love. Right? A father should never humble himself to the point where he says, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Right? A man doesn't do that. Oh yeah, a man should. Your children, fathers, better see you telling your wife, you were right. I was wrong. I am sorry, honey. Will you please forgive me? Your children better see you saying that. That way they'll know. Don't do it in private and shut the door so that, well, I don't want to see my kids. I don't want my kids to see me dip to this level. No, you want your kids to see you rise to that level where you can say, honey, I was wrong. You were right. I am sorry. Please forgive me. That's what a man does. That's how a man shows love to his wife, to his children. Your children better see you say, you know what? That was wrong of me. I'm sorry, son. I am sorry, daughter. Will you please forgive me? I should never have said that. I should never have done that. I should never have put you in that position. Will you please forgive me? The world will tell you a man shouldn't do that. A man should be the man of the house. He shouldn't have to say he's sorry. Well, a man better say he's sorry. If he's going to try to be a Christian, he better. And express yourself in that way. Are we doing the things that Jairus did for his daughter? And I want you to understand that Jesus is still the only way. He's the only way to get to the Father and to get to heaven. We have to go through him. I'm so thankful for your attention this morning. I ask that you will open your psalm books to the song that's been selected. I am resolved. Can we be resolved to do the things that Jairus did for his daughter? And I'm not just talking to husbands and fathers now. We all need to let the world and let our children see us seeking after Jesus. To see us inviting Jesus into our home. That we're the same in here as we are out there. Yes, we make mistakes out there. We make mistakes in here. But Jesus is the ruler of our home. And to see us expressing love, not only for each other in the home, but for our brothers and sisters in Christ. Because God tells us that's how people will know that you're my disciples. The love that you show toward one another. So we prove that we are the disciples of Christ by how we spend time and love one another. Let's be resolved to do that. If you're here this morning and you're not a child of God, you can become one this very morning by being buried with Christ in baptism. We'll talk more about that later in the week, specifically about baptism. But you can do that this very morning, to be buried with Christ in baptism, rise to walk a new life. If you have once done that and have fallen away, made some mistakes, you have time and opportunity to make those right. If you feel that it's something that needs to be addressed publicly, we're here to pray with you. We're not here to shame anyone. But we're here to pray for you. We're here to pray with you. We've made mistakes too. We can help one another in that aspect. If it's something that you believe can be taken care of between you and your God, I encourage you to do that before you leave this building. Go into one of these rooms, shut a door, but take care of it now. It's that important. Maybe it is you just need prayers, that nothing sinful necessarily is in your life. You're already a Christian. You're just struggling with something either physically or emotionally or whatever. We're here to pray with you. We're here to pray for you. If you have that need, why don't you come to the front while we stand and while we sing.